Thank you so much for joining us for this special event with Chude on the subject of joy and connection. Another one of these Action for Happiness events we've been so grateful to see you all for, and to be joined by so many inspiring speakers from all around the world. And Chude, it's absolutely a privilege to have you with us this evening. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure. I've been looking forward to joining the audience today.
Well,
And
your story is a really inspiring one. I mean, you have a background as a lawyer and a journalist and also a media entrepreneur. But of course, what I'm so excited to bring to our audience this evening is not only your inspiring story, but how you've brought that to life to help others, and the great work you're doing across Africa and beyond to support people's mental well-being. So in a moment, folks, we're going to be having a conversation about this theme for this evening and learning more about Chude's work and life. But of course, it'll be interactive as always. So it's lovely to see people already joining the chat. I can see lovely greetings from all around the world as always. And it's so nice to feel part of this global community. So please do respond to what we say, and there will be a couple of interactive things. But also, let's try and keep focused on the content this evening rather than getting too distracted in the chat. And if you have something you'd like to ask Chude, we have a Q&A function. So please do post your questions, and we'll try and get to at least some of those from about halfway through our time together this evening. So thank you, everyone, for being here all around the world. And Chude, I wanted to start because I know that we're particularly lucky to have you with us this evening because you are in the process of disconnecting from the online world, and you've been taking a bit of a break from online life this year so far. I'd love to hear a bit more about what's going on there, why you're doing that, and how it's going so far.
Right. Well, essentially, it's I decided that I wanted to spend more time with myself. I've been, what's the word that Brené Brown uses? I've been rumbling with certain things. And I thought that to achieve those things, I have to spend some time deeply connected to myself, because the world, and this is not a judgment call, the world can be incredibly noisy. And sometimes we confuse our voices with the voice of everything else. And sometimes the best way to show up in the world in authentic ways is to really stay connected with yourself. And so that's what that's apart from the fact that I find myself addicted to Instagram. And so it's a more mundane concern. And I find myself addicted to Instagram. I find myself addicted to, searching for things on the internet. And many of these are non-essential. So I thought to myself, how about I unplug for a year at least and spend some time listening to my own spirit?
So why do you think we find ourselves so addicted to these social platforms? And what have you discovered in letting go of, let's say, Instagram for the period where you've been more offline?
Well, two things. First, social media, as much of the research has shown, are designed to be as addictive as certain drugs or certain, intoxicants, so to speak. They're designed to release dopamine. They're designed to enable us stay glued. Every single ding, every single notification, every single alert is designed to keep us scrolling. Yeah. So that's not even a judgment or a criticism, even though maybe it should be quite a bit, but that's just a statement of what the research says about much of the most successful social media. They're designed to keep you on the page. That's one. The second thing is that, the number one of the deepest desires of us as human beings is connection, which is what we're talking about, and validation. Yeah. And for many of us, the more the world becomes, the more our relationships become disconnected, the more we cling to any sign of community that we can find. And so you wake up in the morning, if there's no one in your house, or you have a fight with your wife or your husband or whatever, or you just feel lonely, there is something in us that says, okay, if I'm in this space where there are other human beings, then maybe I'll feel better. Of course, we've learned again from research that much of the community we get from social media is not the community that really enhances our well-being. But that's innate desire to connect to other people and to be seen as part of a society, joined with the deeply researched addictiveness of many of these social media platforms, means that we have to make a conscious decision to unplug.
So you've taken this time off, and I believe one of the things you're doing is writing a book. And I think what's going to come out in that book, and I'm looking forward to seeing it, is a bit about your own journey. Maybe you could give us a bit of your backstory. I know you had a very high pressure sort of media career, and you very consciously have stepped away from that. Perhaps you could let us all know a bit about the backstory, really.
Right. Well, so I always joke that the book is an emotional biography, so to speak. So that's on that. But many years ago, I co-founded and still sit on the board of an African media company called Red for Africa, and has worked across the continent in elections in Nigeria and Ghana and Sierra Leone and all of that. In 2015, I saw a therapist for the first time. And the therapist began to diagnose mild depression, situational depression, and recommended, and part of the diagnosis, which is weird because when I first got the diagnosis, I thought it was weird that the issue came down to loneliness, so to speak, on two levels. One, I hadn't begun to delve into the research on well-being. So I didn't know that loneliness was actually, a subject that researchers were dealing with. And in the UK at some point, there was a minister who was assigned the portfolio to handle loneliness. So
that's
this
right,
was strange. Yeah, so this was strange to me. The second thing was, I was a hugely busy professional. I was in a romantic relationship. I had people around me. I was constantly traveling, my life has slowed down almost to a dot now because of all the changes I made. But then I'd be in Denmark in the morning, I'd be in the UK in the afternoon, I'd be on the flight to San Francisco in the evening, and I'd rather be with someone, I'm going to a meeting or something. And so it was strange to me that loneliness was one of the issues that I was going to deal with. Nobody even understood it for a long time. And so that was happening. We're dealing with that in 2016.
So just to paraphrase, sorry to interrupt your flow there, but you're saying that despite being surrounded by people and having such a busy, supposedly connected life, you were sort of feeling that something was missing in terms of on the inside, I guess.
Absolutely. And so in 2016, this developed essentially. I had gone back and forth and therapy was helpful. But in 2016, I had a major life event that had to do with the business. And I fell into a clinical depression for 3 months, just fell into it. And, and therapy was helpful, but it didn't really help. And then I was prescribed drugs. The drugs began to make me feel suicidal. Now, I have to put a caveat here that, whatever a doctor recommends, people should follow those treatments. I'm talking about my own personal experience. And so the drugs began to make me suicidal. So I had my first suicidal thoughts after taking the drugs. So I went back to the doctor, and the doctor says, look, okay, so we have to, so we co-created something of a treatment, plan. But then what was happening was that I began to research about joy myself. I thought to myself, I'm going to be responsible for my own mental and emotional health. And so I began to read. And I mentioned to you previously, before this conversation, one of the books I was so lucky to stumble upon was The Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And it's such a powerful book because it synthesized, as at that time, the most cutting-edge research about happiness. And much of it was self-help, was what can you do to keep yourself happy? To keep yourself not happy, but joyful, this inner sense of well-being and flourishing. And so I began to practice some of the things that they mentioned in those books. First of all, it was just the whole world of wait, what? There's all this research and thinking about just my inner life. I didn't have to, I was shocked as to how much thought had been put into a flourishing life. So this was like a child finding a candy store, and so the things that I learned in that period helped me climb out of that depression. Now, everything helped. Therapy helped, being with my doctor helped. All of those things helped. But more than that, it was all of the things that helped me go back into myself and say to myself, how do you stay connected? How do you fall in love with yourself, Chude? How do you find joy without scaling up desire? So that's when I came out of that space, I thought to myself, the things I have learned from this, I have to share it with the world.
And I'd love to come on to, your sharing with the world and also some of the things you learned. But just to say, delighted to hear that it was that Book of Joy from the Dalai Lama, who of course is the patron of Action for Happiness, and Desmond Tutu, who we're great admirers of. That's a lovely thing. But before we dive into some of those things that helped you, I think it's really interesting that you had this clinical depression experience, which will have been incredibly difficult to deal with, and yet your mind turned towards cultivating joy. And some people might say that those two things are at such opposite ends of a spectrum, if you like. Surely when you're depressed, maybe just a step forward towards just coping is all you can focus on. How did you manage to bring to mind that sense of cultivating joy in such a difficult time?
I guess I should start by saying, look, everybody's experience of their mental world is different. Everybody's journey is different. So again, this is my personal, story of this, and I hope it's helpful for people. But what happened was, I didn't know I was going to. I was just looking for how to come out of this congealed, desperate sadness. Because depression is like being locked in darkness, but only the darkness is inside of you, so there's no escape. It does. So depression is an ugly, ugly, ugly beast. And I wouldn't. And it's just horrible. But so for me, I was just trying to escape from depression. I was just trying to find a ray of light, any ray of light. Yeah.
And it sounds like you succeeded. And as you say, we all deal with these challenging times in different ways. But I'd love to hear some of the practical things you found help most. I mean, if I had to say, like, what are your top 3 actions for happiness? What are some of the things that you've learned
things that
in
I
that journey?
discovered in that? And so just to quickly say, so the reason why, what happened was that as I was trying to, as I discovered the self-help tools that will help me with joy, I discovered that one of the best ways was to build my immunity, to say to myself, how can I be resilient, when depression comes knocking? So that's how I discovered joy on the other end of the spectrum from depression. But 3 of the things that I took out of that have been incredibly helpful for me is 1, gratitude journaling. I don't play with my gratitude. It's not a magic drug that once I finish using it, then I get happy. But it just gives me a sense of anchorage and stability. So that's 1. The second thing is meditation. My meditative practice is prayer, but this is not anything that has to do with the theology or anything. It's an idea of connecting constantly to transcendence, to something bigger than myself. I find that constant sense of we are all connected, but there's also something beyond us has helped me. And the third thing is engagement, what I call relationships. Before then, I was very careless about how I had friends and I love my friends, but seeing strong relationships as an essential part of my life and taking the deliberate steps. I was saying to someone the other day about how going to spend time with my mother, is not a nice to have. It's an essential part of my well-being, because deepening that relationship and passing that joy on to her and my other friends or family members leads to a virtuous cycle where my own well-being is refreshed, so to speak. So those 3 things. Very powerful.
I love that. And I really love how you've described that as these are sort of building blocks that help you build a bit of an immune system to protect you from, falling into, sort of lower states of mental health. Maybe we could unpack a couple of those in a bit more detail. So gratitude you talked about. I mean, I was quite skeptical when I first read the research on gratitude, and I wasn't sure it would work for me. But when I put this into practice and started writing down things that I felt grateful for at the end of the day, or indeed asking my children what they're grateful for, I found it really life-changing, and it actually helped me put into context a lot of the things that were almost getting blown out of proportion in my worries and my anxieties in my head. And actually it helped to reframe it, not to get rid of the bad things, but to also notice the good things. What's your own personal practice? How do you do this in your daily life?
So when I wake up in the morning, I pick up my iPad or my phone. So first, I don't sleep with my phone, so I have to go get it, and I write down at least 10 things I'm grateful for. I write them down, then I repeat them to myself. So I'm like, and this is how I said, I'm grateful today for I am grateful today for amongst other things. Then I begin to say so. So I say, I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for that. And then sometimes I kind of do it monotone. I do it quickly, like a routine. And then I tell myself, no, Chude, this is not a routine. Your entire body must hear this. And so I repeat it slowly. I'm grateful for sunlight. I'm grateful for dust. I'm I'm grateful for. I mean, the things I'm grateful for, and I try once in a while. I get grateful for winning a big, for getting money or buying a new this, or having a breakthrough in the office. But I try to avoid gratitude that depends on big things. I always, so somebody calls it the discipline of gratitude. So it's a discipline. So I try to be grateful for the smallest things, a baby's smile, all the views I have had the privilege, all the great food, the best bread I ate yesterday. That's what the things I'm grateful for. I miss some days because I'm a human being, I'm not perfect, but mostly, if there are 365 days in a year, I have journaled for 350.
Mm. It's so powerful. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which says, enjoy the little things because one day you may look back and realize they were the big things. And I think what you've shown there is it's often these little moments that we may otherwise miss or take for granted that built together create days which feel better, which create weeks which are more fulfilling, which create months and years and help guide our journey. So I'm really, really pleased to hear that. But you mentioned this engagement, as you called it, about connecting more with friends. And earlier on, you said that even though you'd been surrounded by lots of people, you felt almost lonely. What do you find the secret is to more sort of deeper connection where you get beyond that superficial and really make it something more meaningful?
It's vulnerability. The scariest thing in the world, but also the most powerful, because you cannot form the research shows that you can't form deep relationships unless you are ready to risk. I was having a conversation with one of my dear friends 2 weeks ago, and I said to her, look, sometimes I feel like I put too much of a burden on my intimate relationship because I don't want to burden my friends. And she says, well, Chude, you preach this all the time. You have, and I said, because most of you are introverts, so you don't like hanging out with people. And I like to hang out. And he says, well, you want that from us. So you should be vulnerable to say, look, Francesca, look, I want to sit and talk with you. And I thought that I had gotten this vulnerability thing down, but apparently not. So but even that telling my friend, I need you, creates such a powerful force field of connection, that enables her to self-reveal, that enables me to trust her, that enables her to trust me. And then the relationship is strengthened. Over the past few years, that reflects everywhere. Just the ability to realize that I need other people. I shouldn't be dependent on them for my emotional well-being, but I need them. We were made to be in community. Modern life, that's why we are drawn to social media, because social media is community. But so I learned that investing daily in those relationships by being vulnerable about what I want has been the most powerful thing when it comes to building meaningful relationships and engagement.
I wonder if it's easier somehow to have that authentic vulnerability to sort of take the mask off and show how we're really doing face to face than it is on social media. I think maybe one of the problems with social media is, in general, you don't see as much vulnerability. You see more the polished image that we'd like to portray to the world. I know you've mentioned to me before that you've been inspired by the work of Brené Brown, and I know people in our community are fans of Brené's. What is it about her message that's really stuck with you?
Well, what is about her message is that Brené Brown is incredible. But also it's the fact that for her, the research is personal. And so you don't get a sense that you're on this journey with a guru. You get a sense that you're on this journey with a person who is living vulnerability. So the most powerful thing that, the thing that runs through her work is also this idea that you're not either a vulnerable person or not a vulnerable person. You're not either an authentic person or not an authentic person. It's a daily journey. That's one of the most powerful things. It's you wake up every morning, you journal. You wake up every morning, you make a choice. Today, I will be vulnerable. Today, I will be authentic. I am going into this meeting. I'm going to show up as my authentic self. I'm going to show up I'm going to show up in this conversation vulnerable. So that's one of the most powerful things I learned from her is that you don't become a vulnerable person and then you figured it out. No, it's daily courage. It's daily risk. It's daily showing up. It's exercise for the soul.
Well said. Yes. Now, what I again find really inspiring about your story is, I mean, you had this sort of wake up realization that, you know, things were, well, you were struggling, and then you found ways to move forward. And I think lots of what you shared as those tips really resonate with what we in the Action Happiness community have been trying to share with each other for some time too. But you've gone a step further in that you're wanting to bring this to others, and you've obviously been doing great work to promote mental well-being and these sort of more open conversations across Africa. It feels like it's been quite a life-changing shift for you. Would you like to say a bit more about how it's changed your life and what you're trying to do now with it?
Well, first and foremost, it's made me incredibly not busy. you know, it's just the idea of focusing on what is essential for my life. What do I really want to do in the world? And why would I make a choice to do anything that doesn't bring me joy? Yeah, so that's how it has changed in terms of it has reordered my priority. Um, just realizing that many of the things that used to, one of the things is, many of the things that used to seem to be essential to me, I'm a media person, to the brand, to the etc. Many of those things I realized when you're not operating from a place of frenzy and fear, and out of your center, then you're able to mindfully choose, this matters to me, this is useful, I'm not going to do that. And so right now, much of my work is, for instance, I spend time as an active member of the board of the company I used to lead, Red for Africa, just coaching a new generation of leaders. Just, it's almost, if I wasn't needed to do that, I would spend much of my time writing and reading. But because I'm needed, and I'm like, and it's strange for me because I used to be completely in the public eye, and then to realize that wasn't actually my desire, and I'd rather be at the back seat, coaching a new set of leaders is a powerful change. Right now, my focus is on my TV show with Chude, which, as I mentioned, it took me 3 years to say, and because I kept asking myself, does the world need this? Is this going to make a unique, distinctive contribution to the world? Or is this about my ego? And so even after producing the show in 2018, it took me 2 or 3 years to check my intentions and say, look, Chude, I'm doing this because it comes from my core and it will make a distinctive contribution to the world. And so that's the way that my life is simply so I say to people, and I'm not kidding, I only have 3 goals in my life. These are the 3 things I consider to be essential. And I'm only doing 2 things. I am doing this show that seeks to share stories that impact, that help people connect deeper with themselves and others. And then, just mentoring a new generation of leaders or a new set of leaders at Red for Africa. That's how radically, at any point in time in 2015, I was doing 18 things.
I think this shows the power of the clarity that comes with a sense of mission and purpose in life. And I certainly feel that in sort of moving to the work that I do with Action Happiness, I felt that it's clarified. It's easier to say what really matters here.
Absolutely.
And so I very much admire the work you're doing to help others. But I know that in that TV show, the With Chude, you're really having you're encouraging more of these authentic conversations. You're meeting lots of people, hearing their stories. One of the things I sense from both watching your work and also just what I observe is that so many people are dealing with insecurities that at one level could be the very real insecurities around the current pandemic about, financial worries and work worries and health worries. But actually, all of us are dealing actually to some extent with inner narrative insecurities. I'm not good enough. I'm not loved enough. I'm not clever enough. I'm not valued in some way. Do you find that that's a really common human need, really, to feel valued, and that we actually, in helping people overcome insecurities, that can be a really big step forward?
Oh, yes. I remember when Oprah did her last show, she said to herself that what she has, the most important lesson she's learned from her show is what everybody's looking for is validation. Yeah, that's the one thing she's learned. She has had presidents on the show. When the show is done, they ask, well, how did I do? And I think that in doing my interviews, I realized that the number one thing we're dealing with is insecurity. That's why we need validation. It's just a sense of alienation from ourselves and from others. We just want to be reassured that we matter and we are loved. And that's just the common thread that goes through all of it. Just it's fear. And the fear comes from a sense that I'm not secure here, whether it's economically or emotionally or whatever. That's just a fundamental, thing that drives most of us.
We talked when we last connected about how we might be able to do this in an interactive way with the audience right now. Those of you who've joined these events before know we love to hear from you in the audience. And I was asking you, well, let's ask this now for real. So there are lots of people who have these inner fears for all kinds of reasons, but I think particularly at the moment, right now, with global uncertainty, the health fears, the financial fears, it feels like the level of fear, both in the UK, I'm sure in Nigeria, where you are at the moment, and indeed in many parts of the world, is amplified, certainly in the media, if not in everyone's lives. Mm-hmm. So when I was asking you about sort of how we deal with fear, you mentioned that naming our fear is a good starting point. Do you want to say a bit more about why? Because at one level, you almost want to push it away, but why is naming our fear so important?
I mean, because fear is like, I said to you, fear is like the valley of the shadow of death. That's what the Christian Bible talks about. But it is not death, it's the shadow. Yeah. And so once you put light into a place of darkness, then it loses its foreboding, so to speak. And that's the same thing with naming your fear. Once you say, this is precisely what I'm afraid of, then you begin the journey. But once you fear the fear, so to speak, once you flinch away, once you hide away from it, you can't start the journey towards putting fear in its place. And I'm not honest, and I deliberately use the word putting fear in its place. For some of us, or for some fears, we may never dispel them completely, but we can put them give them a chair to sit while we continue doing what we need to do.
So why don't we try and do this together as a community now? Because I know that we're all different and unique, but we all face different challenges. And I think it is, we're here talking about happiness and connection and joy, but actually I think it is important to actually, before we look at what we can sort of do in a positive way, it is important to sort of connect with some of those feelings. So maybe we could actually just, how would you suggest we do this, Chude, to invite the audience to share or name something that's bringing them a bit of fear at the moment? How can we do this?
I mean, I think people, so I'm not sure you advise me, but I think if people can open like a sheet of paper or maybe on the chat box.
On the chat, I think would be great.
The chat box, yes. If they open the chat box and just say, and this requires a bit of courage. And if you can, I mean, you can ease into it. You can do it at your own time. But just note, what is the thing I am most afraid of?
Well, if you feel folks willing and able to share even just a word or two in answer to that question on the chat, it will be, I think, very powerful to see that. But again, if you don't want to, that's absolutely fine too. So I'm already seeing failure, death, being judged, uncertainty, losing a parent, rejection, collapse of ecosystems, not being enough, financial situations, indifference, incompetence, being alone, losing loved ones, fear of failure, not getting married, not being loved. It's really moving actually to see this.
I'm finding myself having goosebumps. This is powerful. This is powerful. I'm so grateful to all of you for just, this is, oh my God, I feel myself tearing up. Oof.
And I think as many of us look at this list, and if you are looking at the chat, sorry if it's pinging on your screen rapidly and spamming you, but it's I find myself connecting with lots of the things being said here. I think, fear of losing loved ones, fear of being irrelevant, fear of dying alone, losing my sight. These are so real and so visceral. I'm sure we're all feeling a connection to this. It's part of the challenge of being human, I guess, Chude.
Yeah. That's powerful. Sorry, this is powerful. And so I almost don't want to interrupt that, because I always say that to use a word that is not secular, but I'm using it in a purely secular sense. This moment we're having here is a holy moment. It's the core of what makes us human, the ability to speak these things out, And so what I say is, one of the quickest things that I do in this exercise, I ask people, what is the action that you will take if the worst thing that you're afraid of should happen? And that's a way of giving you the courage And this is not come from me. This comes from a Tibetan Buddhist idea that Thich Nhat Hanh, the great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, talks about often. So it's a meditative practice. So I'm giving you, I'm cutting it short, which is, so essentially what it's a meditation on death. What is the one thing that you can do if your worst fear comes to pass? Yeah. And I'm like, so first, name the fear, then focus yourself on the best you can do in that situation. Like if this happens, so I had a deep fear of cancer many, many years ago. And essentially, what's the worst that will happen if this happens? And how will you handle it? You know, and just that, I'm not saying that, again, I'm not saying it makes you suddenly a person without fear, but it makes the fear something that you can fully face and look in the eye.
Well, I think it would be nice to build on what we've just seen in the community and try and do that. So thank you everyone who shared something there. Again, it was an incredible outpouring of really genuine emotional expression. And I've already seen some people sharing things they might do to be more resilient and so on. So maybe, again, if you feel able, it will be lovely to see some suggestions of things that you might want to do, actions you can take. They may not solve the fear or take it away, but they can, as Chude was saying, help us connect with it more. So finding fulfilling work, connecting, reaching out to people, talking to friends and family, surrender, reframe the situation, learn coping skills, savor relationships, do kind acts, try again, volunteer, try and accept things as they are, remind myself to trust, stand up to the issue, be open to relationships. And then somebody sharing that their cat has just interrupted their laptop, just to be reminded that animals always bring joy as well. Never walk away, pray, trust the process, go to counseling, help others. Chude, how are you feeling as you see this list?
I'm feeling hopeful. I'm feeling hopeful. You know, this is something, you know, and this isn't just an exercise in theory. As I'm speaking to you, I'm dealing with a fear in my life, you know, a very personal fear. And that's what I'm doing as well. So to just see this from across the world is just a reminder that we're not, at the core of it, we experience the same things, you know, at the core. So we're not alone because there's so many other people who have the same fears that we have. And that in itself, you know, connects us together. You know, so fear isn't a positive, we won't pray for fear, but there's something about being fundamentally human, you know, in our collective experience of fear, you know, and so just even naming it in that way and facing it fully, you know.
I think this is a lovely example of the vulnerability point you were making so well. I just saw somebody, I didn't catch the name because it flew past in the chat, but they said, I didn't realize so many other people felt the same fears as me. Yes. And I think that's so true, because we put the mask on, because we pretend everything's fine, we put our perfect selves on social media, we often forget that everybody struggles with these things to some extent. We're all worried about dying, we're all worried about our loved ones, we're all worried about being good enough and valued enough. And I think something about making that part of our common humanity and seeing it in each other, firstly, is a real sense of relief. And secondly, actually gives us more power to then take these positive actions.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's been a really powerful exercise. So
thank everyone, this is fantastic.
I wanted to sort of, before we turn to questions, and I've already seen there's some fantastic questions that the audience has been asking, and I know we'll have a lovely extended conversation on those as well. As you know, with Action for Happiness, part of our mission is to try to bring these ideas, not just for ourselves, but into our communities, into our lives. I know you're doing great work in Africa to help spread these ideas. How do you see that interplay between our own joy and bringing joy to others? How does that sit for you?
Right. I say it's a virtuous cycle. You know, when people ask me, what's the one hack to be joyful? I say, focus on others. Of course, not to the detriment of yourself, but focus on others. That's the beauty of, again, the research about joy, you know, about human flourishing confirms this. It's almost like the more you give joy to others, like the act of giving joy to others is an investment in your own joy. You know, it never fails. When, in fact, now just thinking about it, I thought, oh my God, that's something that's a lesson I learned that I've not practiced recently, which is because what sadness does, sadness is insular. it makes you focus on yourself. Yeah. And then what this does, what giving does, what kindness does, and what all that research has told us is that it opens you up to other people.
Mm.
Yeah. And so the light comes in, and then the more you are with other, the more light comes in. So it's the most powerful thing. Nothing, I always say this, everything I've seen about the research and thinking about joy and my own life and my own teaching is that if you are a selfish person, you can't feel joy. It's just not, it just doesn't happen, you know. You can pretend to feel joy, but real joy opens up when you open up our hearts.
Mm.
That I have found over and over again.
And I think the beauty of that way of approaching life is it's what we call a positive sum game. So I gain, you gain, we gain, and it's not in competition with each other. The problem with so much of modern life is we set ourselves up in conflict with each other. So at school, one kid succeeds and another is seen as a failure. And in the workplace, it's all about sort of a zero-sum game of one goes up, another goes down. And the beauty of taking a sort of bringing joy to others approach to living is it genuinely helps other people and gives us probably the most fulfilling experience we can have as well.
Absolutely. That's what it is. That's what it is. Like, I wish, so I said to people, one of the reasons why I constantly forgive, you know, and I'm constantly trying to be kind and all of that is I wish people knew the incredible sense of well-being that comes from doing for others. You know, I mean, I wish people would discover that, because we're trained to conquer and accomplish and acquire. And those are fine, I guess, because we do need to be, you know, we do deserve to live a good life. But I wish people would know that it's just as important to just do for others, just because in doing for others, you're doing for yourself. If more people knew this, the world would be radically different, wouldn't it?
Mm. Again, reminds me of another one of my favorite quotes, which is the best way to cheer yourself up is to cheer someone else up.
Oh, yes. I love that. Yes,
that's lovely, simple way of getting that message across. Now, Chude, we've had lots of wonderful questions, and I'm sure we won't get through to all of them. But one that was asked fairly on when you were talking about your own loneliness really struck me, because we know that this current situation in the world has been difficult for many people, particularly, I mean, certainly in the UK, we're finding that for young people, when they've been locked down, unable to connect, it's exacerbated, I think, and already a feeling. I mean, recent surveys have shown that it's actually young people who are some of the most lonely now, whereas you might traditionally have thought it might be the elderly that were felt a bit more disconnected. So this question from Col Malkar says, what advice would you give teenagers going through loneliness and sort of feeling that they don't have any friends? You know, teenagers are having a rough time in many parts of the world. What can we actively do to overcome that sense of loneliness?
So this is the thing. It's difficult with teenagers because we're at that stage where conformity is so important, where being accepted and being normal is so important. But the thing is that, so there's this, I say in my masterclass with younger people in Nigeria, there's this sense in younger people of, oh, I can do well by myself, you know, and I don't need anybody else. And that is exactly the instinct that leads to unhappiness. That instinct of, I don't need anybody else, I can do this by myself. Yeah, that is precisely the instinct. And it's a self-protective instinct. You know, when you've been rejected, when you've been, you want to believe that you don't need other people. Unfortunately, you do. So teenagers need to learn the independence of spirit, to be like, look, I know that everybody here is trying to perform this, you know, this lack of needing, but I will choose to invest. So there's one of the best movies one of the great movies I watched was Bad Teacher. And it says, look, you have to know that you may not win in high school, but you want to win in life. And so when people are making these poor choices to seem cool, a person is able to step back and say, look, I might not be doing the things that everybody else is doing now, but that's an investment in the next 10 years. Yeah. That idea, that's what the independence of spirit. Of course, most teenagers need to be guided in this process, because that's not the message they will get from the world. That's not the message they will get from social media. That's not the message. The independence of spirit, to acknowledge needing other people, yeah, is countercultural. Yeah, but it is precisely the instinct that will save you. The idea.
I think a lot of what you're saying, sadly, is still a bit countercultural. I think that's why the work you're doing is so important, because I think the more we can be reminded of the joy that comes from bringing joy to others, the letting go of the perfect image, these things are really flying in the face of the narrative we get bombarded with. Another question I really loved from Sophie, who said she also found the Book of Joy that you mentioned a wonderful inspiration. And what struck her most was how much the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu spoke about being with grief as part of their pathway to a sense of joy. These are both men, obviously, who've had great challenges in their lives. Is that something you've experienced, that there's a sort of connection between grief, loss, so many people facing a sense of loss and grief at the moment in different ways, and that might be a path towards, if not a joyful experience, then at least a longer term search for something meaningful and purposeful? How do you feel about grief and how we cope with it?
I'm not sure it's an original thing, because I feel like I must have learned it from someone, but you cannot be joyful unless you know how to be sad. And there's something in the Hebrew Bible, I think, about there's a time to laugh and a time to be sad and a time to mourn. Yeah, and I think what happens with grief is that grief softens us. Grief reminds us of our mortality. So when we embrace rather than fight what is an intensely familiar, the grief comes for all of us. And there was just a sense, I was looking at my dog, Ada. I was thinking to myself, it's weird that I'm going to set myself up, because at some point in the future, as far away I hope as possible, she's going to go. And at that time, I am going to feel sad. And I'm like, but this is the thing. The joy that I get from being with her now is almost contemporaneous with the grief I'm going to feel when she's gone. And when I used to do the joy math, and so joy and those two things are part of the same package. They are one thing. They are both part of the human experience. And so I've learned in my life that embracing grief opens up a softening of our spirits that actually leaves us deeply connected to each other and the larger human experience. When you fight grief, it's pointless, because it will have its way and its day. Yeah, but it's also, when you fight it, you don't have the opportunity to let it come into you and kind of wash you, kind of firm your emotions up. And all the research we know about grief says that people who fight grief lose. Is that quote, to be happy, you need to learn how to deal with sadness.
And I would say that sometimes in order to change the world, we need to be leaning into the really real problems we face. I find issues around climate change and systemic racism and so on are a source of great pain and wishing things were different, but it's actually, that's a motivator to try and be part of the solution as well. And you can really act more when you feel more connected to the challenges, both personal and social. Natalie has brought a really, really important point up, I think, about the point you were making about needing people. She says, can you say more about needing people but not being dependent on them for emotional well-being? So how do you strike that balance?
So the balance is proportion. Yeah. When you can't breathe, when you can't live, when you can't do your day-to-day life without other people, that's a problem. That's dependence. But when you can reach out to a person, take what you need, and then go back into yourself, yeah, that is healthy need for each other. You have a conversation, you have a cup of coffee, you talk about these, and then you can go back to yourself. And then there's some times when it's proportion. There are times when we overwhelmingly need each other. If you've lost a child in many parts of the African continent, family members move in with you. Now that's normal, because now the need is proportional, to what, you've lost a child, left a gaping hole. So if you cannot survive without other people, you literally can't function. You literally can't do the right things. That's dependence, based on all we know. But if you can just recharge your battery, you reach out to a person, you recharge your emotional battery, recharge your spiritual batteries, reach out to a person, you have a conversation, you spend time with your loved one, you go to the yoga center, you go to a concert, whatever it is that you do to recharge, you spend time with your family, and you can do that and go back into yourself. That's the balance. Can you not survive without this? Or can you be better with it? That's it.
That's really well put. And I remember being very affected by, well, when I realized that giving is a source of happiness, and then someone pointed out to me that means that when we accept help, to some extent, we're doing a favor to the other person as well. It's not about being needy or being a burden. Actually, when we're willing to receive help, actually, that doesn't just help us often when we really need it, but it also gives another person a chance to get that joy that comes from helping others. So sometimes many of us are good at helping others, but not so good at receiving help. And I think it works both ways. So I think that's a nice example of that. Moving on, I think there's a really important question here. So you made a great point about why would you do anything that doesn't bring you joy? And I think there's an important distinction here about, the sort of very real difficult situations we find ourselves in sometimes. So Kate has said, what about if the thing that doesn't bring joy is necessary or unavoidable, like a job, finance, chronic illness, difficult relationship? That isn't joyful, but it's sort of meaningful and necessary.
Thank you for raising that, because I remember when I made that point, there was a part of my head that said I wanted to elaborate on that. And so we're talking about, we're human, and so sometimes we have no choice. We're talking about the situations, creating enough situations where we can choose joy. So if the thing that we need to do is inevitable, then we accept it. It's like grief. If you lose a parent or a child, that's not something that you can do anything about. And then you say to yourself, how can I include this in my sense of personal growth? That's why I talk about learning how to be sad. How can now this moment be reframed in a way that, I'm learning patience, or I'm learning empathy, or I'm learning wisdom. When you do it when you do not have, what I meant earlier was, when you have a choice, why not choose joy? Yeah. But then there are some times when you don't have a choice. Then the choice that you have the capacity to make, which is the whole point of Viktor Frankl's, work, is how can I reframe this in a way that leads me towards joy? That's what I mean.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. And thank you for mentioning Viktor Frankl as well. If there's anyone here who hasn't come across Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning book, it's a really life-changing read. Viktor Frankl was in Auschwitz and survived a horrific situation, and has this quote that always stays with me that says, everything can be taken from a man or woman, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose your response in any given situation. And it's just, that's so powerful, but again, hard to put into practice sometimes.
It is hard.
And you made a lovely point about, whether it's possible to be truly joyful if you're entirely self-centered. But Hillary's raised a great question about the need sometimes to be maybe not selfish, but to be self-focused. She said, can we comment a bit more on selfishness? I see it as essential. If one doesn't focus within, there's an empty cup. Or is there an empty cup to pour from? And we do love that statement that says you can't pour from an empty cup, and therefore self-care isn't selfish. So how does that fit with what you were saying?
One of the best people who's ever said this, and I encourage people to find the video on YouTube, is Iyanla Vanzant. She's a TV host on the Oprah Winfrey Network, and she says, what you want is to be self-full. The quote from the Christian Bible is, my cup runneth over. Until your cup, what's in the cup belongs to you, and what flows over belongs to other people. But until your cup is full, you cannot overflow. Yeah, so it's the understanding that I am given from my overflow. And so first, I must fill my cup. So for me, there's a meditation, there's a gratitude journaling, there's the engagement, all of that is to fill my cup. If I'm filling my cup, then I will overflow. And from that overflow, I give to others.
And did you say you were referring to Edith Eger then?
No, Iyanla Vanzant. She's a Vanzant. She's a TV host.
That's right. Yeah. So I'm getting confused because on the chat, somebody was referring to Edith Eger, who's another person in the sort of Viktor Frankl mold, who's written beautiful books along similar lines of dealing with trauma. But that's great. We'll make sure, folks, that we get these resources and ideas shared in our follow-up message to all participants tomorrow, along with the video from this event. I've seen some people have been asking if this is being recorded. Chude, we're getting towards the end of our time together, but there's still more great questions. And I'm really enjoying this conversation. Chloe has said, what advice would you give to somebody who's trying to reconnect with friends when they feel like they've closed themselves away from? In her case, it was while recovering from trauma. But how do we sort of find the courage almost to reconnect with people we might have lost touch with?
Again, it's vulnerability. It's the confessing to ourselves that we need other people, you know, and then the acknowledgement that the downside of needing other people, and that's what makes vulnerability a risk, is that we might be rejected. That's one of the things I struggle. That's one of the things that my therapist helps me through, just dealing with rejection. Rejection is a part of the human experience. It just is. You know, I mean, if we're designing humanity, we would maybe design it without rejection, maybe, but it just is part of it. So you need to, so it's the knowing that we need others, and knowing that need, the risk of that need is that we might be rejected, but that's all right. It's part of that's the game. That's life. And so when we do that, then we reach out to people. Now, this one, I understand, reaching out to people is our duty. Them accepting is theirs. Yeah. When we accept that, then we know that we just do our own part and let it be. So you say, look, I'm reaching out to you, dear friend. I know that I know that I should have reached out earlier, but this is what I was going through. If there's something you need to apologize for, you apologize for it. But then you say, but I mean, many years ago, it happened to me and a dear friend of mine. We had a huge fight, you know, and she's my best friend. She's come over, had a huge fight. And then once when I was going through a deep darkness, and I said to her, dearest friend, I miss you and I need you. You know, and I was lucky. And it took a lot of courage, because I did think that she had done something. I did think that she had offended me and she hadn't asked for apologize or explain, you know, but I just thought in this moment, you know, my humanity is more important than my ego.
I love that phrase. My humanity is more important than my ego. I wish that we could all put that into practice as a standard way of being. But our ego is in many ways a sort of defense mechanism against that rejection, isn't it? So, and I think one of the things you've been saying implicitly there is that we can never really change what other people do, but we can always try and choose what we bring to it. And that brings me nicely onto perhaps what might be our last question of the evening. Harleen has said, in relation to other people, really, what do you do if someone else is stuck in grief mode, or, you know, is not feeling very joyful? What can we do to try and influence their joy and happiness?
Well, the most important thing is to just let them know that we're there for them. That's, I think, what the research on grief says to us. Just the most powerful thing you can give to a person who is going through a dark period, you know, especially when you don't know what else to do, is to just say, look, I am here for you, and to keep reminding them that you are there. You know, so it's not just a random, oh, I'm here for you, you know, but I'm here. Do you need me? Is there anything I can do? You know, and a reminder, a constant affirmation of your presence. I think that's the most important. Sometimes we're so in a hurry to do, we forget to just be with people. Just be with them.
Yeah, very well said. And linked to that, Petra's made a point which I think is related to the current situation. She says these days the interpersonal relationships and social interaction are limited for many of us because of COVID, and also more people are living alone. So what advice do you have to sort of bring, if we can't be together in person with the people that we trying to connect with, how else can we keep that alive remotely in this sort of slightly more disconnected world?
Well, first, I mean, if you are on this connection, that means that you most likely have the capacity to reach, they have human beings around you, you know, the internet company or something. So this is not a conversation for people who are living in the desert. Or I think it's to without what's the word? Without encroaching on the personal space of others. It's to reach out and create those relationships. And if you don't already, to strengthen the ones you have consciously by feeding it, you know, checking with your friends. I mean, I had a friend, I mean, and we're all in this. You know, I've had friends who I feel, oh, I'm asking too much of this friend. I'm going to spend the next 6 months just giving to this friend. So that's a deliberate, intentional investment. And if you don't have that, it's to reach out and start building it, knowing that building relationships take time. You have to make a series of emotional investments.
Chude, we are almost at the end of our time. I'm so grateful for your time. You've reminded us of the power of being alone and embracing our loneliness. You've reminded us of really practical things we can do on a daily basis, from gratitude and meditation and engagement. You've reminded us of the power of bringing joy to others, but also being able to name our fears and sort of respond to them positively. So much wisdom. Lovely to see so much engagement on the chat, and I found it very emotional to see the real fears and actions people were sharing. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with as a final thought, or something else you'd like that we haven't had a chance to cover? What would you like to say as we leave the audience this evening?
Well, I think it's to remember that many of the emotions we feel are common to all of us, you know, and even if it feels intensely lonely at the time, you can comfort yourself at least with the knowledge that, like Maya Angelou used to paraphrase, I am human. Nothing human is alien to me.
Well, it's a joy to have this common connection across a distance via the web, and to have people from all around the world sharing a bit of this common humanity this evening. Thank you so much for making time to be here, Chude, and to all of you in the audience as well. Really grateful, and keep up the inspiring work.
Thank you, will do. Thank you so much, everyone. This has been a beautiful session.